Okay, so welcome everyone. My name's Aaron. I am the training or the Global Citizenship Education and Activism Support Officer with Friends of the Earth Ireland. So I've kind of recently started the role, and this is part of our Learning Hub series of seminars and workshops. We've recently run another seminar and workshop on data centers and the risks they pose to our energy transition to renewables. And today we're kind of continuing on the theme of asking energy for who benefits from any sort of transition. How do we make sure it's a just transition? How do we make sure no one gets left behind? And who's worst impacted by climate change and the coming climate crisis? So I've put together a few slides on the background to energy poverty, just some basic stats as to why would an environmental organization get involved with this sort of thing. But first, I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists who will be speaking after me. So here today we have Shayla Strange, who works for the Ballyfermot Traveller Action Project. We've James Casey from the Independent Living Movement of Ireland, and we've Alejandra CR from KATU Ireland, which is the Community Action Tenants Union. So each participant is going to be talking a little bit about the effects of energy poverty on different communities, how different people are affected, and why it needs to be seen as a climate justice issue and a social issue together. So I'm just going to share my screen and launch into the presentation. If you have any questions or thoughts, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll get to chat, answer questions at the end. So if during any of the participants' contributions, you feel like you want to ask something, put it in the Q&A and we will get back to you. Okay, so let's go from here. Okay. So one of the kind of core campaigns we have in Friends of the Earth at the minute is about energy poverty and pollution, and we call it Warm Homes for All. So the kind of idea of this is, it's like I said, bringing together a climate and a social justice issue and tackling them together. So values of Friends of the Earth, for those of you who might not be a supporter already or might not have been to an event before, we are based on principles of solidarity, participation, inclusion, supporting nature and people, and building a just world where both nature and people thrive. We're part of the world's largest grassroots international environmental network. So Friends of the Earth has lots of groups across Ireland, and we will be part of it. Our vision, like I said, it's a world where people and nature thrive, and it's about system change, not climate change. So we want to, change the social systems that are causing injustice, causing rising global temperatures and climate catastrophe, and addressing both these things at the same time. When we mean climate justice, we talk about it as a call to action, and understanding that those who've done the least to cause climate breakdown. So, i.e., the people from the less developed or developing world, people who are maybe lower income, they are not the ones who caused the climate crisis. The largest emitters are, the global north, super rich in the global north, and so on. A climate breakdown deepens poverty, and it, creates greater injustices if it's not addressed. So climate justice is a framework to help us fight back against that. I've got just a little bit of information on energy poverty and the background to it. Residential property contributes to about 11% of greenhouse gas emissions. Almost 60% of Irish homes have a BER, so an energy efficiency rating of D or lower. Irish homes use 7% more energy than the EU average. And most importantly, there's record levels of energy poverty, particularly recently in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which obviously drove up energy prices. We've heard talk of the cost of living crisis that it's ignited. It's resulted in a massive amount of people struggling to pay their bills, more so than there were before. So 1 in 3 Irish households are now living in energy poverty. And we have a fact sheet with further details that went out with the webinar. I'll send it as part of the follow-up as well. And you can see how energy poverty is defined, because it's just got a specific definition. But what this means is that people are spending more and more of their income to heat their homes and using up more and more, fossil fuels, gas in the process. It's not an insignificant part of our climate emissions contributions. 11% isn't nothing, and this is a very obvious place where we can address the social and environmental aspect hand in hand by retrofitting buildings, retrofitting on a larger scale, on a more collective scale, so that tenants, low-income earners, and those with older properties aren't cut out, and ensure warm homes, renewable heating, and a just approach to heating our homes. So our demands currently for the campaign, this is a little bit tied to the budget, so we'll talk a little bit about kind of actions you can take towards the end of the webinar and follow-ons that we're going to be having from this. But our demands are tied to addressing the inadequate incomes by raising social welfare rates in line with cost of living increases, tackle cold homes for lower income renters and homeowners first, introduce new targeted measures to bring down bills and guarantee everyone's right to energy, and get off fossil fuel heating and ensuring a fair energy transition. So just to really sum it up, those who are already marginalised are often living in the worst housing conditions, and they're locked into fossil fuel infrastructure. They don't necessarily have the means to move away from it as easily as people on higher incomes who can access things like retrofitting schemes. This means people are more at risk of volatile energy prices and blocked from accessing renewable energy and being involved in the energy transition. I think as part of building an inclusive environmental movement that can really deliver change, we need to reach all parts of the population, and that includes people. We need to make it clear to people that addressing the climate crisis can have positive impacts in their lives as well. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get at here, building a movement that takes everyone with it, and that everyone can benefit from. So just before I hand over to the participants, I'm just going to launch a very quick poll, quick questions. It'll take 2 minutes to fill out, just around have you been at a Friends of the Earth event before? Where are you coming from? So we can get a feel for the demographics in the room, to see who's attending our events. So a poll is launched now. Can people see that okay? Okay, perfect. I'm seeing answers coming in now. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes and let people fill that out. Okay. I think we'll get going from that. Thank you everyone for filling out the poll. A question there about, I think it's just worth addressing now, what's the definition of energy poverty? If the household spending more than 1/10 of their net income, but excluding motor fuel on like electricity and other things to heat and power their home. So if you spend more than 1/10 of your net income on electricity, gas, fuel, whatever it takes to go into your house, but not including motor fuel, that's considered energy poverty. Okay, so with that out of the way, I'm just going to hand over to our first speaker on the list. So Shay, everyone's going to talk for about 15-ish, 20-ish minutes about how energy poverty, they see it affecting themselves, their community, etc. And then we will take questions from there. So you okay to go, Shay?
Yep. Can everyone hear me? You okay?
Yep. Brilliant.
Good stuff. Okay, so basically my background is I work for Ballyfermot Traveller Action Project. I'm the coordinator with that organisation. I probably I'm an old man basically. I'm 62 years of age. I've been around the block a few times. And climate change, in my opinion, is probably it is the biggest factor and the biggest thing that's affecting me, but more so my children, my grandchildren. And if we don't address it, we're in serious, serious trouble. So that's probably a personal perspective, but I'm going to speak about traveller community and how they're impacted by energy poverty, and have a look at the environment, health and accommodation. And sorry to wrap up then with what I see as a possible a discussion point then as to where we can move forward from. So we'll start off today by concentrating on travellers living in trailers and caravans, and those trailers and caravans are based on what they consider to be legal sites and illegal sites. And some of the illegal sites that the local authorities consider to be illegal anyway would be in situ for the last 50, 60 years. And they're still considered to be illegal after all those years. And they would have gone through maybe 4 generations of the one family, and still can't get any recognition from the state. And there's a purpose to that and an agenda to that, and that is to eliminate traveller culture and assimilate the traveller community into a sedentary lifestyle. I'm going to particularly look at travellers living in these circumstances and how they're impacted by energy poverty. And the caravans in most cases are well beyond their sell-by date, and I'm aware of some caravans that are in excess of 30 years old, and they show it. The windows will be hanging out, walls are crumbling, numerous holes in the floors where the rats have eaten their way through the floors, and paper tin walls with no insulation of any description. And then when we take a look at the traditional means of measuring energy efficiency in any building or any home, and we find the BEAR rating, and there is no BEAR rating low enough to measure a trailer or a caravan. So we consider then, and Aaron touched on it earlier, what is energy poverty. And one means of looking at energy poverty is taking, if you're spending more than 10% of your income on fuel. And when we examined the National Traveller MAVS report that was done in 2019, accommodating ethnicity, it was found that 77% of those interviewed were living in energy poverty. And here the average spend on energy was 28%, with some spending as high as 70% on energy. We compare that to the most recent figures after the increase in energy costs in 2022, 2023, and we see that in the settled population, 28% are suffering from energy poverty. Now, if we reflect that back to the 77% in 2019, we can safely assume that we're up into the late 80s or 90% of travellers living in energy poverty at this stage with the increases. This is then compounded by the fact that travellers living in trailers are in most cases living in poverty, and that's the wider understanding of poverty. And this is borne out by high levels of unemployment, low levels of education, a high dependency of social welfare, and add to this large families that travellers traditionally have. And this adds additional costs in relation to heating, feeding and washing. On a personal level, as I said earlier, I work in a traveller organisation, and this really resonates with me when I look at poverty, and I see that some families that I work very closely with are spending, during the winter period, last winter, they're spending €20 a day on paraffin. That's coming out of a very low welfare payment of maybe for a full family about €400. Other families were using up to 4 bottles of gas a week, and that comes out with €40 a go for a bottle of gas. And the reason for this high use of energy is because you have to keep a trailer heated 24 hours a day. And in one case where I went in to visit one family, and the newborn baby had just been brought home from hospital, and they were basically just trying to keep the child alive in the middle of last winter. And the gas or the paraffin had to be burning 24/7 to do that. Other families depend on makeshift boilers. So they would have a boiler, a sort of cobbled together boiler at the back of their trailer, which itself is deadly dangerous. When you consider the makeup of a trailer, it's very light cardboard type material, and it can ignite very easily. We've seen Carrick Mines a number of years ago, where once a fire starts on a traveller halting site, it just rips through the whole site in no time at all. And I recently witnessed a trailer going on fire, and I couldn't believe how quickly that burned down. So this idea of using these makeshift type boilers to heat, and when you would question the the mentality of someone using it in such a volatile situation. And basically what the family says to me is, it's food or it's energy. We spend our money on food or we spend our money on energy. So they prioritize the food, and they use these boilers instead, or these burners instead, to create some level of energy. And the fact that most traveller halting sites, including the one that I work on in Ballyfermot, was built on a dump. It's surrounded by industrial units. So there's a ready supply of material that you can burn when it comes to these burners. And most of it in reality is toxic materials that's being burned. And it's basically killing the people that are using it, but they have no choice. That's the last resort. So if we want to improve then on this accommodation, find some other way of living, the only alternative that Dublin City Council and the other local authorities are offering to replace these dilapidated caravans is what they call the caravan loan scheme. And the loan scheme is actually administered by the local authority, but it's funded by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government. And for anyone that has looked into this scheme, there's little doubt that the scheme is just not fit for purpose. Even the local authorities who are being asked to administer it recognise that it's not fit for purpose. And I would sit on what they call the LTACC, which is the Local Traveller Accommodation Consultative Committee, and that's made up of traveller organisations, councillors, politicians and DCCO officials. And we've come to the conclusion quite firmly that this caravan loan scheme is just not fit for purpose, right? So we've written to the department most recently, and we've outlined there the points that we made in relation to it. And the points we've made is that all that's on offer is a loan of 40,000 to the traveller family, with 5,000 being retained to actually put the trailer or the caravan in place and plumb it and doing all them sort of things. That leaves 35,000 for a trailer. What 35,000 when it comes to a trailer that family can live in will purchase for you is a trailer that is second-hand, probably around 10 years old, and will have little or no insulation. We're reckoning, and this is Dublin City Council's figures, is that it would cost to get a reasonable trailer stroke caravan, you're looking at 100,000 to purchase one of these. So the scheme itself, that's the first problem. The scheme itself then is run on a loan basis, and this forces traveller families who are on very low incomes, social welfare incomes, into unmanageable debt. And once the loan is taken out, the avenue for other credit then completely seizes up. So if you're going looking for a loan, the credit union, and they say, if any other loan, say, yeah, I have a 40,000 loan for a trailer, and say, well, your income is X, Y, and Z, you ain't getting a loan. So what that drives you into further poverty by driving you into the hands of money lenders, because you have that christening, you have that funeral, you have that wedding, the things that just can't be avoided. And that's just some of the simple. There's a wide variety of things you could be looking for a loan for. Okay. The next thing then we look at is the method of supplying these trailers. And because it's being done on a loan basis, as opposed to the way all other social housing is done. So if I, as a settled person, go in to Dublin City Council, they'd never offer me a loan. That what they do is they'll offer me social housing on that type of welfare income. And yet they expect a traveller family to take out a loan to do this. And this isn't the local authority necessarily, this is the Department of Housing that has come up with this scheme. So really it's a way of it's basically a racist approach to how we house the traveller community, as opposed to how we house the settled community who are in need of social housing. And then even if you look at the way we would house a settled family, if they arrived on the doorstep of Dublin City Council tomorrow and said we're homeless, they'd get put into a hub or whatever they'd get put into, and with the end result of being offered HAP payment. And the HAP payment in Dublin for a 3-bed house on welfare is probably around a little over 2,000 maybe you'd manage to get out of Dublin City Council. That will give you the equivalent, it'll cost Dublin City Council the equivalent of 24,000 for the year, 48,000 over a 2-year period. And yet Dublin City Council and the department will only allow a traveller family 40,000 to get accommodation for the rest of their life. Right? So you can see where the racism is heavily built into these schemes that the government come up with. When we look at health and safety, as I was talking about earlier, the boilers, we have numerous issues, including the illegal boilers and the risk that they pose to fire and the fumes, as I said earlier, because of the type of material that's being burnt. The trailers are also supplied with electricity from Dublin City Council, and that electricity is just one cable coming into the unit. And if you try and plug electric fire in at the same time as you plug your kettle in, your fuse is going to blow. So even if you want to resort to using electricity to supply your heating, and you've maybe a 2-bed trailer, 3-bed trailer, you can only have 2-bar electric fire going at any one time. Any more than that, the fuse is going to blow. And I've seen people wrap a piece of tin foil around the fuse to stop it from blowing. That is so dangerous. But again, it's what people are forced into doing just to get some level of heat or some into their accommodation. Okay. If we look at the environment then, and as I said earlier, the choices between food and energy for a family, it just means that they're not interested in environmental issues. Their interest in that is absolutely zero. So they'll continue to burn toxic materials just to get heat into the house so they can keep their children alive. Also, then when we look at the environment, we see that these poorly insulated trailers, they have a really big problem with black mold. And it wouldn't be unusual for me to go in and see a wall completely covered in black mold. That causes serious problems for the children. The children are regularly in Our Lady's Hospital, as it is, based on Ballyfermot, Crumlin area. So we would regularly, I think the average, attendance at an A&E is 1.2 times a year for the settled community. For the traveller community, it's 14 times a year they would find themselves visiting an A&E. So we can see that this is causing serious problems. And most of the time they're going with lung infections and respiratory problems. So, and these issues, by the way, I also do a bit of work outside the traveller community, in the settled community and around Crumlin and Ballyfermot. And I regularly visit houses, corporation houses, social housing stock, and the black mold issue is the biggest issue that I come across on a daily basis when I'm visiting these homes. So it's much wider than the traveller community, right? So however, the issue around energy poverty in the traveller community is compounded by this deeply embedded sort of systemic racism at governmental level. And I have to be honest here, anybody and any party that has been in power over the last 60 years, for any reasonable length of time, has a responsibility here and needs to take responsibility for it. So that can't be denied. So when we get people jumping up and down, and when they come out of power and they get holier than thou and they call out the wrongs of the world, I really look on that with it's shameful at times. Okay, so I'll just wrap up on this idea then. So, as with any social issue that you care to address, it can never be taken in isolation. And as I've shown from what I've said here, is that energy poverty is related to a number of wider issues. The wider issue of poverty it's related to the crisis we have in housing at the moment. It's related to climate change. It's related to racism. It's related to class. So we can never address these issues if we don't address the wider issues that are going on in society as well. And in my opinion, our current neoliberal approach to this issue will never offer a solution to poverty or to climate change or to racism. Nor do I believe will a reform of that system offer any solutions. What is needed, and I said it was outlined at the beginning, is a system change. And that's a system that puts GDP as a measurement of prosperity behind what we would refer to as social policies and the social good of the state. So I think that would be a really good place to start if we're going to talk about energy poverty, climate change, and all these issues. We need to talk about system change and what that system change will look like. So I'll probably leave it there, and we might get to discuss that a little bit further later on. Okay, thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Shay. That was a really useful and important contribution. I'm just going to, on that vein, leading into social housing and the issue of damp and mold and conditions, I'm going to pass it over to Alejandro, from KATU, who's going to be talking about some of the organising work that's been happening also in South Dublin around the conditions of Dublin City Council housing. So take it away, Alejandro.
Thanks very much. How are you? I'm just going to share my screen, if that's all right, because I made a small presentation. Here we go. Can you all see that all right? Sorry about this. And
yeah, it looks perfect.
Great. Just see if I can just move this and make it into a big, don't really do this too much.
I think if you go to the bar at the top and click on slideshow.
Oh, thanks. Great. From beginning. Thank you. So, yeah, my name's Alejandro. I'm from the Accommodation branch of KATU Ireland. And we have been campaigning for the past 6 months with public housing tenants to demand pretty much respect from Dublin City Council from the neglected years they've had from local and national authorities in respect of the conditions that they're living in. And I'm hopefully going to do their story proud today because they've been amazing, the people at DAV House. So just in respect of introductions to KATU, KATU is the Community Action Tenants Union. It was set up in 2019, pre-COVID. It was set up as a collection of many housing groups that have been around for many years. Dublin Based South, Dublin Central Housing Action. These are lots of people who wanted to have a more structured format of housing and campaigning and making sure that it had better longevity than previous groups. And they've been involved in many housing campaigns, Apollo House, Take Back the City, occupying derelict properties across the city, and to echo the failing policy in the housing crisis. They started with a very small membership. You can actually see on the right-hand side there, that was the first meeting. So that was probably about 30 people, and now we're in the thousands. Our membership is private renters, homeowners, and now public housing tenants. And what we do is we support our members. We fight evictions, and now we're on the offensive with organising our communities, campaigning for local, national issues that are voted on in our AGMs. So that brings us. I just actually wanted to just give it. Maybe some of you are aware, but I think it's always important to remind ourselves of our past. Considering today's this year's the 50th anniversary of the last major housing strikes from 1972 and 1973. They were organised by the National Association of Tenants Organisations, NATO, and they were dealing with similar issues of what we're having now: overcrowding, poor quality, and also then you had the council wishing to increase rents. So they set up, and they had some clear demands, these being the total overhaul of the rent system, setting system, and the full recognition of the housing tenants group. The group had about, as you can see, 90,000 households of a total of 105,000 council tenancies in the country, and their rent strikes of 1972 and 1973 succeeded. And that's, although there's many problems with our public housing system, and we're really dealing with poor quality for a lot of tenants, there is something very fair with a 15% if the conditions are good. And it's, that's one thing tenants, the few positives we hear is that feeling that anxiety that isn't there. And, it's unquestionably, there's a quote here from the Irish Times that said it's unquestionably one of the greatest bloodless victories this country's had for tenants' rights over landlords. So I think it's important to remind ourselves what we can achieve if we come together. And that's what KATU is trying to do. So we put forward a universal public housing policy. Our branch actually wrote the first two in 2022 and 2023. And the main objective was organising, mobilising housing tenants on their issues. And, this is true. Some ideas like getting our branches to 10% membership of public housing tenants, and the reprioritisation of, occupied, one issue we're having is with this poor quality is the council often leave out houses that are occupied and only do up the ones that are empty to get new tenants in. And this is a huge problem because, you're dealing with someone who's living in a property for 30 years and the degrading, if they don't have the financial capacity to cover the expenses of fixing the place, then the place can get into a really poor state and affect people's health. So that was the other aspect of it, to prioritize the homes that people are living in. So what was our approach? So we had the objective of trying to get the 10% membership. for our branch. And, you know, since we wrote the policy, we thought we'd really try to give this a strong go. And we first started off with a timeline. In the first 3 weeks, we went door knocking and surveying in public housing blocks, gathering information on tenants' issues, ultimately holding union meetings with tenants and trying to establish how we go forward, and hopefully in the future set up resident committees. Now, we did have success with every block. We had issues with some blocks, just people were tired, and we can understand sometimes, especially if they've had politicians come to their door before, people the trust it's a deficit out there, and that's really understandable. But we were very lucky, and with DAV House, we started getting people taking notice of us because we were door knocking constantly, just being recognised, people recognising your face, showing up regularly. Because, you know, the first door knock they'll just see is someone at their door, but over time and asking questions, people feel like you're actually engaging with them. And one thing, you know, after every door knock, we'd always create leaflets with the issues that we were finding and trying to show people that we're hearing what's their key concerns. So that was the first 3 weeks. And I just wanted to go into a bit of a description of DAV House. So it was a post-tenement construction, approximately the 1950s, named after, obviously, David from the Land League, a historical figure. And it consists of a mixture of studios and 2-bedroom apartments. And there's 2 complexes, roughly consisting of about 60 tenancies. Now, this is bricks, just in the interest of energy. This is pretty much just concrete blocks, no insulation really. And I don't even think there's no insulation in the attics either. And on the right-hand side, I thought I'd include that because it's right next to DAV House. It's called the DAV, and it's the new complexes built to rent. I couldn't find it on daft.ie, but just down the road, equivalent prices I'm finding for 1-bedroom rooms are, you know, 1,900, 2,300 for a 2-bedroom, 3,000 for a 3-bedroom. So, you know, it really, there are public housing tenants in the DAV as well, but issues they have is, you know, they can access, the children in those are treated like second-class citizens. Public housing tenants living in the DAV can't access the amenities such as the playground. They were told there would be parking for them. There was no parking, which then came to be issues of people having to park on the road. And if you know the 123 bus line, it's a narrow road, so it was even affecting public transport. No planning in that extent of not allowing people to, you know, actually they were told there would be parking. And you can find it on Dublin Inquirer. They came and met with us, and they also talked to those tenants as well. So what were the issues? So we met with the tenants all together for our first kind of meeting. You can see it on the right-hand side. So the issues that we were talking to them about, and then we came up constantly on the doors, was access. So, you know, a big problem with them is they have no access to actually open the gates through their homes. They have to literally leave their apartments, walk down flight of stairs in some cases, and elderly people as well. Go to the door, open the button there, unless they have a car, and then they have a fob. But then the people who don't have cars don't get access to these fobs, so then have to do it. And there's been incidents such as the fire brigade, I think the ambulance services having to climb over the gates for emergencies. And I'll tell you a story later when we tried to address this situation and what we were told was a solution. But the main thing we were hearing was, and you can see on your right-hand side, the damp, the mold. As Shay was saying earlier, it was bad. And in some houses worse than other, and often those houses had vulnerable kids and you know, it was not these were a drastic situation for a lot of people. And they had single pane windows. All of them had single pane windows. In some cases, windows that couldn't open, which we were asked was a fire issue as well. And no insulation, and the doors, some of them were still wooden. And what they wanted as well was recognition from the council. They wanted regular council engagement and coordination with the council. They felt neglected. They felt that it's gone to the dogs. And, you know, we were, I think we got good trust from them, and we started building from there. So literally, this was something that happened very recently afterwards on the 13th of April, where we went to the local area office to submit our demands. And I just wanted to include something said by the tenants themselves, by Anthony Gaffney, who came with us. He had a tenant in DAV House.
My name is Anthony Gaffney, and we're here at Dublin City Council offices in Dublin Village this morning as a group, an association along with KATU. We're here to demand respect from the people of Dublin City Council. For too long, we've been living in substandard conditions. Our houses are damp, they're cold, it's costing us a fortune to heat them, and we're just sick of it. So we've come together as a housing association and hoping that together as a group, we will be demanding double glazing, proper insulation in all our houses.
So, you know, it was clear that this was the biggest issue we were trying to get out of the council. And oh, sorry, I'll pause that. So on the 12th of March, KATU and tenants met and prepared a statement, and it was formally signed off by the tenants. So we made sure that the Dublin City Council knew that this was the majority of the tenants wanted this. And the tenants were so pushed that we actually went directly to the area officer, area managers, and delivered by hand, as well as emailing it to all area officers. We prepared a catalogue of issues for further escalations in case we had to campaign even harder. And on the 13th of April, we were actually organised a public meeting with the local area manager, who was surprised to find all the tenants in waiting for him in the Bosco. I think he felt a little ambushed. And the meeting, to be honest, it was challenging when you meet people who don't really have the capacity to solve all the problems there. They might say some things, but also the tenants have very little trust in what the council has to say. The reason why they were frustrated with the council is that you constantly call, you constantly email, and nothing gets done. All the time, these are families emailing constantly about the welfare of their children based on the conditions that they're living in, and the council, nothing. You call one area office, no answer. You call another area office, no answer. So you get the frustration is there. So someone sitting down in a meeting has a lot to prove. We were also assisted by other branches of KATU who came down with us on the doors, door knocked with us, but also gave us information about their campaigns as well. And then we also met, as I said, we had members from the DAV private complex, but the public housing tenants in there and their issues as well. And we prepared a statement to the council. So just to, this took a lot of meetings. Each meeting is door knocking. It's constant effort. You're always checking in with the tenants. As I said, people don't have trust, and it took us a lot before people said they had hope. And that takes a lot to build, and it takes a lot of meetings, takes a lot of door knocking, takes a lot of posters and flyers and everything. So this was our approach from weeks 3 to 12. So tenants actually officialised their membership of KATU and as a separate committee. So they weren't in our KATU driven at Dublin 12, although we have members from the branch who are on our committee, just to make sure we can liaise. We worked with local councillors, and we put forward a motion to Dublin City Council on their meeting on climate action on the 22nd of May, just to deal with our issues of insulation and windows and doors. We were also asking for fire, health and safety assessments and environmental assessments. As I said, with the damp and such, many of those houses are in poor condition and are probably not habitable. Also, with windows being broken, we really often talked about if there was a fire, how would we get out? And then, we also brought attention to the council by protesting outside during the 22nd of May to bring attention to David. So on the 13th of June, we had our first meeting with Colleen O'Reilly, who's the Chief Executive of Housing. He agreed to meet with us. and it's a challenge. When you're sitting down with all the managers, there's a lot of things you have to prepare for, and the meeting was not what we wanted. We worked really hard, and we were kind of given what we thought was a bit of a closed door. And we were furious, to be honest. They said we had to do all these assessments. We had surveyed, we had given them in booklets of information with every issue, with photo documentation of every issue of the house. And we kept our demands simple. We weren't trying to make the whole thing that Dublin City Council can do, which is fix one household, fix the loudest often. The people who fight the hardest, the people who can fight the hardest, they often try to kind of take you off the group by moving you on or fixing your issue. But the tenants knew this, and they kept it simple. They said insulation, accessibility, and maintenance, and they kept it like that. So we didn't feel demoralized, but we were angry. And so we proceeded, as I said, about individual issues rather than DAV as a whole. So we wanted to continue to focus as DAV. So we kept planning and kept preparing. So we prepared for future meetings. We did role plays to deal with if we were going to be stonewalled again. How would we go past that? We resurveyed and petitioned all the tenants to really show that we all wanted these three demands. And we prepared our approaches if things had to escalate. So then on the 25th of July, we met with Colin O'Reilly again with Dublin City Council. He actually went to the blocks. Tenants prepared to show him around, and this meeting was very constructive. Again, we showed them all the documentation, all the surveys we had done. We'd given them extra information, and they agreed. They gave us guarantees, which were we were willing to accept that our timeline of 6 months to do wraparound insulation might not be within the timelines they see, but we need to see plans. We need to see this done. And they agreed to plans. So, we're getting the attic insulation, double glaze, new doors, improved ventilation, new gutters, paintwork, and regular maintenance has already started in the complexes. So what are the next steps? We're waiting. We're literally going to meet this week again. Our plans are, we're hoping to see how their plans are going to go ahead, and we're going to make sure we're part of that approach as well. We're already cataloging all the work they've completed and not completed to be sure that there's we can have that ready. We're also increasing the resilience of the committee. It's important that that first of all, the tenants are self-sufficient. They're doing the hard work. They're going through it. We just help them as they need us. But one thing is to make sure that there's a lot of tenants want to talk to each other. They might have known one or two people, but now people are talking to each other more and more. And the main thing is to create that community. It's in the name of KATU, and what we want to do is help them with that. And then also we want to expand. This is proven that this can succeed. So us and the tenants, there's hopefully this is a campaign that's going to get bigger and bigger, and maybe we could do some proud of the history that we were talking about before. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Some take-home messages. I didn't think I added a slide. I'd just like to say, please join your local tenants union if you're not organising already in your community. It makes you feel welcome. It makes you feel like you know your people. And my name's Alejandra CR. You probably heard I have an Irish accent, and I was born here. But it has been more evident than ever of how difficult it is when the social cohesion by the failure of a state to promise adequate and public housing, which we used to do, and to see the rage that goes out there, it's upsetting. But what makes me feel optimistic is when you see people organize and know that the authorities will let them down and fight against that. That's where we should be going with this. And thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Alejandro. Really, really important focus on the practicalities of organizing there. So I'm going to move over to my last speaker. And I see you're answering a few questions there, Shay, which is great. Maybe just we'll come back to them and just address them on the stream as well, like vocally, so we can have it in the recording. But yeah, there was one question about how are things in Galway. I don't know if that was in relation to the traveller community, but I think James is going to talk to us a little bit about things in other parts of the country outside of Dublin now. So I'm going to let you take it away, James.
Thanks very much, guys. Yeah, well, everything's better outside Dublin. Obviously, it's 28 degrees all the time outside Dublin. No, I mean, I think it's not really an urban rural divide. Things are. Well, I suppose we come to that too, talking about the great word that I like to use at the moment, gaslighting. And I will come to that eventually. I haven't anything as fancy as the guys have done with really cool slides and stuff. Please forgive me, I'm not in my own home tonight. I'm in an hotel because I've got a meeting tomorrow. I think it's great to hear the other speakers, and it's great to hear everyone's perspective and learn from each, and you see the connection that we have with all of them. Social justice and environmentalism are linked. They're not mutually exclusive. They have to be linked. I was very lucky and privileged to go to the high level political forum this year with Coalition 2030, and I learned so much at that space. Where it was about the Sustainable Development Goals, and seeing how they're one and the same: climate justice and climate saving, not climate justice, climate saving and social justice. You have to have them. It's the people who are less well off, less advantaged in societies around the world that are the most at risk and are really suffering. It's not the oligarchs. It's not the leafy suburbs. I mean, it's not the people driving EVs. That's nice and cool, but it's the people who are subsistence farmers. It's women, it's children, it's disabled people, it's people of color. That's what's happening, and that's who's genuinely suffering. So to bring that social justice voice to climate change is hugely important, and in fact, it's integral. And I learned so much about that from talking to other colleagues and comrades from around the world in the States, and that was a fantastic opportunity. When it comes to disabled people and climate, energy, poverty, and climate justice, I think in Ireland we can really look at it as something that's unique. And I don't use that lightly. Disabled people in Ireland are not represented. I mean, I work for a disabled persons organisation, so we represent disabled people. We give agency to disabled people at a grassroots level. We don't provide services. We're not a charity, a large charity. And that's an important distinction, because unfortunately in Ireland, the big jump that we haven't made with equality or equity is for disabled people. And it's not for want of will of the general public or for want of finances. It's for a lot of, and I will say, gaslighting that has been going on over the last 20, 30 years about how disability is represented and disabled people's lives are represented. And none more so when we think of energy poverty and climate change. There's a constant narrative that disabled people are somehow, sitting in a puddle of their own. I'm a disabled person, sitting in a puddle of our own misery, waiting for someone to come save us. That we're objects of charity. That we're consistently needing financial resources again and again and again. That we're somehow an energy burden. That any little crisis that affects this country, and that word is overused too a lot of the time too when it comes to disability, but any other crisis that affects this country, it's us. And how is that solved? What is the narrative, the mainstream narrative about that? Put more money into disability services. That's how the narrative, not more money into disabled people, more money into disability services, more money into large charities. And that creates a divide, because the narrative that has been pushed, the mainstream ideological narrative, is talking about disabled people as a figment of charity, as a portrayal of charity. Therefore, they need to be taken care of. So you put money into resources, you put money into universal payments, €500 payment for people on disability allowance. That's not a targeted payment. And that's not for all disabled people. That's people who get disability allowance. It's a very different thing. So the whole narrative about disability in this country has been misrepresented for a long time. And it's a very carefully and nuanced misrepresentation. It talks about disability as a need of being taken care of, as a need of childlike, desexualized, a very clean clinical perception of disability. Because disability in this country is worth a lot of money. And it's important to make sure that we pull the right, or that they, not me, pull the right purse strings. We all remember back in the 1980s we used to get boxes in the door and we'd see the terrible things that were going on. And that's how you do it. That's how media does it. It talks to your soul, it talks to your heart. And when it comes to disability, that's been working very effectively over the last 20, 30 years. And it's an industry that's worth billions of euro every year. You have lobby groups that are consistently lobbying on behalf of the government that gets more millions of euro for their service providers that are supposed to provide services for disabled people. And that's fine, that's great, that's what they do. But that's not disabled people themselves that are getting that. That's a service provider. Again, and I'll use this example, it's like talking to IBEC about consumers' rights. You know, we don't ask IBEC to write consumer law for us. But when it comes to disability, it's okay. Bear with me, folks, I'm getting to the point. I know, but I'm just trying to foreground this. And why is this happening? Well, this is in many ways a hangover from the bad old days. You know, we've got to think maybe, you know, in my lifetime, and I'm not, I know you might think it's strange, but I'm not 21. Although I do look at, no, I'm not 21. I remember in the days, you know, when, you know, single parents were being locked away in institutions, where LGBT plus people were being attacked or had to leave the country, where people of color were singled out in societies. In our society, it was a homogenous society, claustrophobic, conservative. And that still exists when it comes to disability. It's a hangover from the Catholic Church that these organizations are still pushing the narrative around disability, around energy poverty, around disabled people been somehow against the grain of energy poverty and against the grain of climate justice. It's like saying, well, everyone except disabled people because they need to be taken care of, which is nonsense. When we think disabled people in themselves, you know, we're always thinking about the environment. Public transport is a perfect example. Good public transport works for everyone, whether that's local link, whether it's Irish Rail, Dublin Bus, I was going to say Galway Bus, but it turns up on time. This works for all of us. It's universally accepted. Good homes work for all of us. They're healthier, they're better environments, they're, you know, more thriving communities. This works for all of us. They don't have to be singled out. So the narrative that have been pushed to this point up until the last few years is that disability is somehow outside the norm of the climate justice and the climate crisis, that it's over here, that there needs to be exceptions made for that. And that's because that's the narrative that's been pushed. Because if we start solving problems, then people start losing jobs. And that's not the way that, you know, industry works. And this again goes back to the whole idea of climate justice, and it goes back to the idea of energy poverty, and it goes back to the idea of and I fantastic that Shay said it there, and it's something that they brought up in the States, using the CSO figures, right? See, so using GDP as a measure of poverty, that's nonsense. You know, we'd all be on 60, 70 grand a year. If you look at the CSO talking about disabled people, this is 1.6 million disabled people in this country. 1.6 or 1.16. It's not 1.16. That's a self-declared thing saying, have you got a functional limitation? That's all it is. It makes the problem too big. It makes a problem that the government consistently goes, right, let's throw money at this problem again and again and again and again and again. Where's that money going? They can say it's going here, it's going there, it's going here, but it's not been targeted again and again and again. So it goes back to the idea again about energy poverty. How do you fix energy poverty for disabled people? Well, start looking at disabled people as part of society. We're not like over here in the corner that needs to be taken care of. We're part of humanity. Disability, impairment is just another form of the human condition. There is no form as normality. Normality doesn't exist. But when it comes to disability, it's always seen as the word that the bad word that we don't like to use in our collective, which is special. We really don't like it. Or differently able, that's another one too. That's a terrible one. But using those words for industry creates finance, creates a crisis. At the moment, we're listening to a lot of this ideas that there's a crisis in disability. Inverted commas at the very bottom in disability services, not for disabled people. I don't know any disabled people in crisis. I know disabled people that are passionate about, you know, the environment, about climate change, about art, about football, about, you know, relationships, about work, but I don't know any of them that are in consistent crisis. So the narrative that is framed about disability and energy poverty is always one of throw more money at it rather than look at the bigger, more mainstream holistic problems. Creating thriving communities, self-sustainable, 15-minute stations, good public transport. These are the things we want. Targeted payments for people who can't use, targeted payments, sorry, for people who need that extra help with their energy bills. And it goes back again to housing. It goes back to the idea of why we're using housing, because there's a lot of bad insulation in these places. unfortunately, too, I have a fear that I'm not from Dublin. I'm from Mayo. I can hear everyone groaning. So there is this kind of almost reliance that disabled people throughout the country are somehow too still, living in shacks or whatever. That's not true. I mean, some of the problems are big, especially the public transport problems around the country. And it does go back to public transport problems. It doesn't go back to private cars. Private cars are grand, but private cars will fall down eventually. And also, it's a very few amount of people that can actually afford a private car if they're disabled, because there's a lot of adaptations to be got and etc. So that's quite and fair play to them, but that's an elitist thing. We're talking about local links. We're talking about better mainline trains. We're talking about little bus services, bus Éireann. Again, and I was thinking too, what Alejandro was saying there, it's the same again, it's about divide and conquer. The narrative is always on the individual when it comes to disability. Right, I can lobby and I can say, right, I need a bus to go from Waterford to Kilkenny, and I will lobby, and a big charity or a big, lobby group will pick up on my story, and they'll put me in the picture in the paper, sitting in my wheelchair with, not being able to get on the bus, and that'll get sorted. Bus Éireann will get a bus for just that route. That's my problem solved. I'm fine. That's just me. But what about the thousands of other people around the country? What about, Dervla and Monaghan that wants to go to work, or I don't know, Kieran and Claire Morris that needs to go, to see his friends. They can't do it. So again and again and again, it individualizes disability, because if you individualize something, then that makes the problem yours. It doesn't put the problem on society. But also, and this is unique to disability in this country, it's worth a hell of a lot of money. Over 2 billion every year gets pumped into disability. None of that 2 billion goes to disabled people. That money, if it was targeted, that money, if it was going to where it should go, then there wouldn't be this level of inequality. So I think thinking about energy poverty, you have to think about disability in regards to the mainstream, in regards to inclusion, in regards to equity, not equality. It's not just been asked to the disco, it's been asked to dance. I robbed that off Fiona Weldon, who's my colleague. But it is important, because the gaslighting that goes on around that narrative can be dangerous. We're now seeing parties throughout the country that are using turf cutting as a party political issue. It won't be long till they get poor Shea Machine from Westport in a wheelchair to say, I need turf to keep me warm, I'm fond of turf. And that will be used as a motive issue. So I think it's more important to kind of think of what's behind the message rather than what the message is constantly bombarding us with. That disability is part of the mainstream. It's not specific. It's not a sector. That's a word. What is that? We don't have the LGBT sector. Disability is seen as an industry within a certain sphere, but disabled people to themselves are not part of that industry. We're not consumers. We're objects of consumption, but we're not consumers. And that's where there needs to be a difference. That's where the government needs to, pull the finger out and kind of go, right, what's going on here? We need to talk directly to disabled people, directly to climate justice people, and see where that's happening. But also we're part of that debate within society.
All right, brilliant. Thanks a million, James. So we've time now for about maybe 15-ish minutes of questions, and then we'll wrap up. I'll talk about the next steps after this, how you can get more involved in the campaign, and what the follow-on kind of pieces are. So I mean, there's a few questions there that were coming through. Two quite specifically for Shay, which I might just ask you to respond to on the stream, just so we have it in the recording, which was where does the information for the more than 10 times higher rate of travellers having to access A&E services, so between 1.2 for settled people versus 14 times for travellers in a year, and another one, what energy solutions would best deliver for trailers and caravans. And then there's a more general question I'll move on to. If you have any questions, folks, put them into the Q&A now and we'll get to them. So Shay, if you don't mind answering that.
Okay, the first one then is in relation to the A&E, and we were Okay, sorry, you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is A&E. That came out of a piece of research. There had been no real research done on traveller health since 2010. So as an organisation, we got a small bit of funding and we done a piece of research, very local to Ballyfermot, and it was on what were the outstanding issues in relation to health. And what came through was chest infections was a big one, mental health was another big one, cardiovascular another big one. But when we dipped down into it then and we said, okay, access to health services, and we were astonished by the number of people that were involved, that were going to A&Es as opposed to going to their GP. So it required another piece of research to be done to find out why people prefer why traveller community preferred the A&E over the local doctor. We believe it's somewhat based in racism and a negative reception that traveller community get when they go into the surgery, whether it's sitting in a waiting room with other people, because we know that there's a high level of racism and discrimination experienced by traveller, not just at an organizational level where DCC or the government, but it's also a societal level where something like 60-70% of people said they wouldn't have a traveller as a neighbour, or they wouldn't work with a traveller, or they wouldn't like a traveller to be related to them. So we have this really heavy level of racism that's wouldn't be accepted. That if the same was being said of black people or Chinese people or something else, to be uproar, to be murder, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's accepted in the traveller against the traveller community, this level of racism. So we believe that's partly why the reason why so many travellers go to A&E as opposed to going. But it's also deeply embedded in the seriousness of the situation where children are getting these really bad chest infections where they can hardly breathe, so they don't see the opportunity to go to a GP. Their first protocol, get the child to hospital quickly. We think the child is going to die. So that's really, but anyone wants to copy that, if you send me on the email, maybe 3 or 7, and you can pass on my email to people and I can supply them with that piece of research that we carried out. And what was the second question then? Sorry.
Yeah, actually, maybe if I could just get that off you and I'll send it out as like a follow to this webinar so people can access it. But the second question was about what is a scheme that could work for traveller caravans.
Right. Some of the stats that I put out to you today, they came out of a report, a piece of research that was done by Traveller Mabs, Michelle Cairns and Stamp. I can't think of the gentleman's name out of Mabs. Stuart Stamp, I think his name is. And they done a piece of research on energy poverty in the traveller community. And that is a really good place to go if you want to see, if you want a good in-depth knowledge of what's happening in traveller community in relation to energy poverty. It's really worth having a look in there. And it's because of the increase in energy, because of the caravan loan scheme, it could be slightly out of date, but it gives you a good understanding anyway of energy poverty and solutions to energy poverty for a traveller community, that is.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's perfect, Jay. I have another question that just came in specifically for one of the participants. So from Jason, he asked, James, what can be done immediately to give disabled people independence? Is it a matter of raising disability allowance, making it easier for people to access allowance in the first place, more help with energy bills, etc.?
I suppose independence is kind of a word. Yeah, there's an idea that independence is a great question. Thanks, Wayne, Jason. I suppose independence is kind of, we think that's living on our own. None of us live our own, you know. I mean, when I left home, I had to live in a house with 3 lads, a bedsit. That wasn't good. But that's what you do. You live with people. So I think what we could do is, the first thing is, you know, we've enacted what's the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. This is a remarkable document. It talks about disabled people from what's called the social model of disability and the human rights model, which comes from it, which frames disability as a societal issue as well as a functional issue. What we can do straight off is start listening to disabled people and their representative organizations. That's hugely important. We listen to the unions, we listen to climate change groups, we listen to women's groups, we listen to we listen to Ryanair, but we don't listen to disabled people's groups. What we do listen to is groups that don't represent disabled people and don't represent disabled people's voices or opinions. You know what, when we're doing stuff in Isle of May and our colleagues in DPO Network and that, we don't put a spin on stuff. We do democracy grassroots. We talk to people. We get their opinions together. We collate it and we present it, and they're vastly similar. We don't need to put an agenda on that because we don't have an agenda. The only agenda we have is to make sure that disabled people actually get to speak for themselves and not have to ask permission to speak for themselves or go through an industry provider, because that's where it gets messed up. The narrative that we hear a lot of the time is that we need more services. I don't want more service. What are we going to do more services? That's like saying, put on another plate at the buffet. No, we don't need that. That's just demonstrating itself. So the more that goes into that, the more that narrative is spun, the less equal disabled people are going to be. And we've never really been equal. But the bright side of that too, I think, is that, well, again, going back to the question, fund disabled people's organizations. Not one disabled person's organization in this country is funded for actually representing disabled people. And I can tell you, when we get a little bit of cash, like we did during COVID, we can do amazing things. We had thousands of people online. We had a social inclusion project which got 700 people across the border counties and rural areas online using a tablet, involved in their local women's shed, men's shed, their local environmental group, the local GA, all mainstream, because we know these things, we know the issues, but it's not given. It's always listened to industry. So going back to that question, is that it's not putting more money at it, it's putting more money where it needs to go and not putting money into, put the money into public transport, not petrol. But that's what's happened. It's been put into petrol all the time. If we talk about public transport, cleaner transport, we're not going to the Irish Motor Federation or whatever they're called now, and saying to them, what do you think, commuters need? But that's what happens with disability consistently. And that's why the problems keep happening. And at the same time, people's lives are put on hold through a whole series of immoral kind of judgments. So that's what I think. Well, it's not what I think. I think that's the right thing to do. I think the moral compass is pointing north in this one. And there might be a few people around the compass with magnets. I'm sorry, I'm talking in simile. There might be a few people around the compass with magnets, but you know what? Like, those magnets are going to go off. So again, it's talk to disabled people's organizations. Be a little bit more discerning about who you're talking to too about these things, because again, like, some of these organizations are massive. They have marketing departments, the communications departments, corporate departments. You wouldn't think it, but they do. And it's all about the collective, and it's all about grassroots.
Thank you, James. And I think that kind of ties in nicely to the idea that it's important to build an environmental movement that has space for everyone, and that accommodates everyone's different ability to contribute, in whatever way is most appropriate. I think that ties into it nicely. There's one question here, and maybe this would be a nice one to sort of end on. And I might slightly reframe it here. So it was basically from Brian Darcy, who was asking, would a left-wing government, or giving, Sinn Féin, solve these problems, or would it take a socialist government like People Before Profit to solve these problems? I might reframe that slightly, because we're not really in the business of picking party X or party Y and Friends of the Earth. It's not really our place. Maybe we can think about it as, what would we be looking for as kind of concessions or as improvements that could be given whoever is in government, be it who's in government now. And that's kind of the theme of our next workshop, is how you ask for or make your voice heard to decision makers. But maybe if we could reframe it as, for each of the speakers here, what are the kind of concrete improvements that you think need to change? Like, what would any government need to prioritize in order to make a difference in terms of how energy poverty is affecting people the way you see it? Alejandro, are you maybe interested in taking that one first, because you haven't had a chance to answer a question yet, or how you feel?
Yeah, for some reason my video stopped working, but I'm more than happy to answer the question.
Okay.
I think the first thing is a complete moratorium as pay-as-you-go meters. This is something we see constantly for instance, in David, and it's really insulting, because often these meters are actually on the ground, so tenants actually have to get their hands and knees to repay them, and they're paying more money for failures of maintenance and retrofit on decades-old infrastructure, and they're paying a premium compared to the rest of us. So a complete moratorium of what is essentially charging more money for being poor in Ireland. So that would be the first step, and that would show a lot of goodwill. As I said throughout the experience, what would be needed is a state that is actually responsible, that, and that comes from people going at them in a way, and I know everyone here is very involved with that as well. So I think, that for energy policy, it would be pretty much that the demands are met by the locality, that, whether it be retrofit, immediately all public housing blocks, improve, enhance, also labour force. We have no staff in Dublin City Council to even engage in these projects. They're all private contractors. And so, we need to build up our infrastructure. If you want to build houses, the first major step is to retrofit them all, get those apprenticeship going, get them on salaries that they can live in Dublin on, and the rest of the country, So, it's labour, it's retrofitting, and it's also not premium on the poor. This is the things I would say would be the big steps. Premium poverty, sorry.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Shay, do you want to go next?
Yep. I'll answer in two sections. First of all, from a very specific traveller perspective, I would argue that what's needed is for the state to address racism against the traveller community at every level, that approving of their policies from a racist perspective, and particularly from a traveller racist perspective, that would be done. But also to take the way you framed the question, and it has been framed in a neoliberal or capitalist hegemonic sort of ideal that there is no alternative to capitalism. You know what I mean? So you're asking the question, what would we do to change it? We'd scrap it. We wouldn't change it. I don't believe that changing the system is the answer. I don't believe that the left-wing, a lot of the left-wing parties that are perceived to be left-wing, Greens, Sinn Féin, Labour, Soc Dems, they want to reform the system, and the reforming the system is just not going to cut it when it comes to climate change, when it comes to poverty. And we're facing into a nightmare sort of scenario with climate change. And they think tinkering at the edges or being nice to the oil barons is going to change that. And it's not. The reality is it's not going to change anything. So we need a complete system change. And that is an overthrowing of the capitalist system. That, for me, that's straightforward. It's not complicated. But once we keep framing the question, as you did, in a, what can we do to change it to make it work? We're never going to get there, because people will always believe that this dominant hegemony of capitalism is, sure, there's no other way, it's Tina. There is no alternative. You know what I mean? So we need to change the narrative. We need to take that dominant space away from capitalism and how they frame questions and how they always put it in that context of what do we do to change, to give you a little bit, to keep you happy, to keep the climate activists happy, to keep travellers happy, to keep whoever it is happy. But we're not going to give you everything because we don't want to lose our profits. Ultimately, that's more important than any of you.
All right, thank you, Shay. And then lastly, James. I know kind of overlaps the previous question, but if there's anything you'd like to add?
Not really. I think that the thing is just echoing the other panelists there. I think it's really about, you can't have industry writing policy. You can't have industry dictating how a whole group of people in society, anyone, whatever. It cannot happen. Again, it's unique to Ireland. It's not unique in a context of Europe and modern European country where industry is writing policy, and it happens there. Hey, you know what? I don't think we're an overtly corrupt country. I mean, we're not giving tenors to the lollipop person that has crossed the road first or stuff like that. But have we seen recently in certain things, it kind of does happen. And when it comes to disability, there's a whole industry there. There's a whole vested industry there that more often than not has not been totally truthful about what they're doing and who they're doing it to and what they're doing it for. Charity doesn't mean, these are not little small charities that looks after greyhounds or donkeys or seals. These are big leviathans of money. And their interest is to keep themselves going, and their interest, the lobby group, is to keep them going rather than implement CRPD or anything else. And that's an important thing, and that's fair play. Like, that's what they do. That's totally fine. I fair play. That's cool. It's more power to you. But at the same time, what is happening from that very point, you got industry writing policy. And I don't think it matters if you're a left-wing government or a right-wing government or whatever government. It's simple moral question that you have good data equals good policy equals a better society, whether that's climate, whether that's, you know, justice, whether that's human rights. And especially with disability, or specifically with disability, you have to have, you know, the collective, the people's voice, the democracy driving policy, good data sets rather than industry.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So very last question here, and it's going to be one coming from me, is and also Emma Jane, who's quietly on tech support in the background, but fair play for this. But I think this is a good way to maybe to finish it up, which is like, what do you think is maybe the role of the environmental movement in supporting the struggles of your organizations, or what you're working on? Because we've been talking a lot about how, you know, these issues affect the issues of energy poverty and pollution affect certain communities more than others. But what do you think is maybe the role of the environmental movement in supporting the struggles that you have as well? How can we work together maybe more effectively? I'm going to let anyone come in on that first who feels strongly enough.
I would suggest that we start listening to young people. I think young people are amazing at the moment. I see the was it Climate Action Friday or what, I can't remember the name, but the action that the young people have been taking, and they're adamant. They're not pulling any punches here. They're saying we need system change, and we do need system change. And what that system change is, how it evolves, is it socialism, whatever it might be. We just cannot continue on with what we have at the moment, which is this unbridled capitalism stroke neoliberalism that just puts priority of the GDP of the country over everything and everybody. You know what I mean? And that's basically what we have. And we're probably one of the most neoliberal countries in the world at this stage. We probably make the Americans blush. We're that good at this stage. So that would be my say. Start listening to young people. Listen to the slogans that they're shouting when they go on their protests. You know what I mean? And they have a lot to teach us.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Fridays for Future are having another demonstration Friday the 15th as part of a global call to end fossil fuels, and we'll be promoting that in the near future as Friends of the Earth as well. But just one for people's diaries now. So James or Alejandro, you'd like to go next?
Yeah, just you know, as much as our government's neoliberal and we feel like they're just you know, bulwarks of the status quo, we have to remember they're also they're fearful, and power does not concede anything without demand. You know, when we think about the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act in the US, you wouldn't think it's Richard Nixon who was the guy who put those environmental policies in place. But just a kind of a metaphor for, you know, how we have to get this. You know, during the protests under Nixon's reign, he had to put buses in front of the White House, and there's a famous quote he had to Kissinger that he says, "They're going to break in." You know, this is, as you know, mobilization of organizations working together. You know, I'm an environmental engineer, and I joined KATU because housing is the most important thing facing Ireland. And if we can't solve housing, what the hell can we solve in this country? So, you know, this is what we have to be, even whatever government's coming next, we have to be the mobilized force outside to make them realize if they don't, they have to follow the democratic will of the people. Whether that democratic will is a complete change in the system, that's what we have to fight for.
Okay, brilliant. And lastly, James, do you want to give us the final note?
Yeah, well, fair play to the lads. I mean, I think really it's just I think, you know what, there's a lot of messages in the world. There's messages everywhere. There's a lot of stuff flying around and a lot of noise, and there's a lot of angry people, and it's good. It's good. Anger is good, you know, because it drives action. When it comes to disability, I think it's probably with the environmental network or the environmental group is stop. You know, don't look at it as outside climate justice, climate change. It's part of it. We're part of it. But also, I suppose there is that little bit discerning. Just look and see who you're talking to, because the narrative of somehow being an opposite to environmentalism is not been driven by disabled people. It's been driven by a lot of the time by more vested interests that want to create a fracture in the collective. They want to have the individual voice rather than the collective voice. And you know what, with environmentalism, there is no second chance. You keep messing things up, it's not going to come back. And it shows short-termism in Ireland, and it shows a lack of forward thinking. So I think really it's about looking at the environment in more than just 10% of people doing everything right. More would be better to have 80-90% of the people doing things 90% right. Whether that's a reduction in meat consumption, whether that's a reduction in cars, whether that's a reduction in EVs. Even EVs cost a lot of money. I mean, you're talking about having to get all these parts for these things. And I think we can do it. I think Ireland can do it. I've seen that in the summer with the gang in America. I've seen how Ireland is respected on a global stage. If they can do it, if we can push it, it can be done. So I think we are a tiny little country, but we do pack a punch. We're like the small fella in school. Like we're loud and we can get things done, but people kind of like us as well. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, folks, and thanks everyone for coming this evening, taking time out of your Monday. So just to finish up, I'm gonna launch one more poll, and then just let you know what kind of the next steps are. So this poll is only 3 questions, so it should only take a minute or 2 to answer. So has your understanding of the topics basically changed as a result of this session, and do you feel confident to share that information? So I'm going to give you a minute to finish that up, and then I will let you know the next steps. All right, at the risk of losing people, there's too much silence. I will just explain what kind of the next steps for this are. So as part of this Learning Hub series of events, we're also running a follow-on workshop this time next week, so 7 p.m. on Monday. And there'll be an email going out throughout the week for that as well, if you are on the Friends of the Earth mailing list. And the purpose of that workshop is how do we write kind of letters to address our demands to decision makers, particularly in advance of the budget. Budget 2024 is October the 10th, Tuesday. And so we want to get our perspectives, our personal stories, our opinions on issues like energy poverty and the climate crisis in writing to our decision makers before then. So if you're interested in coming along, it'd be great to have you there. We should have 1 or 2 decision makers or decision makers or politicians there who can give some insight into how these sort of things are formatted. Just need just confirming with them before I announce them here. But that should be next week, and you're all very welcome to come. And then as another thing, we will be attending the cost of living demonstration on Saturday the 7th at 1 p.m. as well. And keep an eye out for more information regarding banner making and this sort of thing. So this is a demonstration in town in Dublin. Sorry, my Dublin bias shown there. At 1 o'clock on the Saturday to basically demand that the government do more things to address the rising cost of living, which is obviously very integrally linked to issues of energy poverty and the rising cost of oil and gas. How that impacts the climate crisis, and almost gives us an opportunity to move away from fossil fuels. So and then there'll be other actions in the run up to the budget as well that you can participate in. So e-actions and this sort of thing. So that's basically what we've got coming forward. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks so much, the participants. And Thank you, Jury, in the chat there, telling me that FFF, so Fridays for Future, is striking in Cork on the 15th as well. Apologies, I wasn't aware of that. And they're at City Hall every Friday. So I don't know if that answers Brian's question about the Fridays for Future demo. So there's Dublin and there's Cork and there's potentially Greystones and potentially more. It's led by local students. So keep an eye out for your local area, and there might be an event happening you can support. So I hope that's it then. I think we're good to finish up, and I'll hopefully see you all next week. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.